Good afternoon.
Is this on?
Yes.
I'm Lillian Lodge Kopenhaver, Executive Director of the Kopenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication here at FIU. And I'm pleased to welcome you this afternoon to our Leadership Webinar Series. The mission of our center is to empower young women professionals and academics in all fields of communication in order to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their professions and in their communities. So we're delighted you've joined us together today for the webinar. Our speaker will provide you with a wealth of information that you will find both interesting and helpful as you pursue your career path in the field of communication. Our original speaker, Rebecca Monson, had a family emergency and cannot be with us today. However, she described our speaker this afternoon as someone who has been her most important and supportive mentor, and someone who, without her leadership and guidance in her career, she would be nowhere. So I'm pleased to introduce Miranda Mulligan, the Knight Innovator in residence here in the School of Communication and Journalism, and an award-winning journalist and product designer living and working in both Miami and Milwaukee. She has expertise designing editorial products, having spent most of her career in and around newsrooms. She consults with numerous media brands and professional organizations, designing and producing innovative experiences to be shared with the world. Mulligan is a Society for News Design board member and its digital director. Previously, she was a creative director at the National Geographic Society, the executive director of the award-winning Northwestern University Knight Lab, and the digital design director at the Boston Globe. In 2011, she led the responsive design approach to bostonglobe.com, a project that was the recipient of numerous awards and often referenced as a key moment in digital media producing. I'm pleased to present Miranda Mulligan, who will talk with us today about taking the leadership in the digital age. Miranda, it's all yours.
Thanks, Lillian. Thank you guys for coming. Keep clapping, keep clapping. Thank you for coming. So, hi guys, I'm Miranda. And I appreciate your patience with my wanting to flip the script a little bit and do things a little bit differently. And before I kind of get going on a little bit about like my history and how I got here and things, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an explanation why I'm sitting and not standing. For me, I think leaders like Lillian, who have a lot to teach, are people that make a lot of sense for them to be lecturing and guiding us and being our guideposts for life. And I have a kind of a little bit of a different perspective on education. I prefer to have a conversation because you all have had different experiences than I've had, and you're going to teach me as much. And through us sharing our experiences, we're going to learn a lot more. So I wanted to sit with you guys and have a dialogue and have a conversation rather than just put together a presentation for you. So I hope that's okay. And I know I kind of insisted on a couple of you sitting next to me. I promise we're gonna have a lot of fun. All right, so a little bit of history about me. I graduated from high school when I was 17, which doesn't mean that I was super smart. It just means that my parents put me in school when I was very, very young. And then I moved down here at 17 years old to go to the University of Miami at the School of International Studies, which promptly closed my freshman year. And I freaked out because that's why I chose the University of Miami. And I moved back into the School of Communication because that's what I had done in grade school, in middle school, and high school. I'd been on like the school newspapers and the school yearbooks, probably a lot like you guys. And spent the next couple of years kind of bouncing around undergrad, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I also worked at the restaurant on campus, and I worked at Sandbar in Coconut Grove, and I worked at the time, there was a Cafe Tutu Tango in Coconut Grove. I worked there for a while. I worked at Titanic for a while. The reason I share that is because I'm very aware of the fact that like sometimes you're doing your education and you're having to like pay for it. And this was an expensive school, not quite as expensive as it is now, but it was a very expensive school for me. I was not someone who had parents that could pay for my education. I relied on scholarships. I relied on my own merit and my own willingness to put in the work. So also at the time it required me to do a dual degree. And so I got my undergraduate degree in photojournalism and creative writing, English creative writing. And I used that time really to kind of explore what I wanted to do with myself, and found a way to get one of the faculty members there to get my foot in the door at Ocean Drive magazine. So I spent my first 3 years out of college working at Ocean Drive magazine for $25,000 a year, which is just only slightly more money in today's dollars, but not really enough to live on in Miami. So I continued working at the bars in Coconut Grove. And so I was working probably 80, 90 hours a week until I was about 24 years old. And right around that point, I was kind of frustrated. I had been working in the art department at Ocean Drive, which allowed me to do some editorial artwork. It allowed me to do some special projects. It allowed me to do some event design. It allowed me to do client work. It gave me a lot of exposure to different types of visual communication because it was a small staff. And the benefit, I found one of the major benefits to working at places with small staffs, even if they paid me very small amount of money, I got a lot of experience in 2.5 years. And so then I decided to go do some graduate work because I was really interested in pivoting directly into journalism. And focusing a lot deeper into journalistic storytelling. So I went to Ball State University for a couple of years and took that time to work on a master's degree, but at the same time, I took all the undergraduate classes I could to learn how to draw, to learn how to make maps, to learn statistics, all the things that I didn't get in undergrad, and I knew I needed to get a little bit of exposure in order to work at this very niche area of a newsroom, which was the information graphics department. And what I wanted to do was draw pictures and help people understand a story that's best told through an illustration. If it's a step-by-step, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. If it's showing the inside of a diagram of something, drawing that, it's not something you could necessarily take a picture of, you had to kind of create it out of nowhere. So I learned a little bit of like 3D modeling, I learned a little bit of web work. And so, very early parts of my career, I think that if I have a skill at all, I'm able to kind of figure out when there's an opportunity, that there's not a lot of people doing X at this time, so I should learn how to do X. And so in 2004 and 2005, newsrooms were really, really afraid of doing anything digital. We're really afraid of doing anything that doesn't involve, here's what we're putting in the printed newspaper. We know we have to put something on a website. We don't really know how to do that other than by making a JPEG of all the pictures and copying and pasting the text article and putting it into a content management system. And so what I did is I said, okay, well, let's figure out how this whole internet thing works. And I started just chipping away at the time, building things in Flash was kind of a thing. And I was like, all right, the language of Flash is a language called ActionScript. And I spent some time just like not being afraid of making bad things. And just I had editors that allowed me to just keep playing and trying things over and over again. After I finished at Ball State had kind of an agreement with the Sun Sentinel that they usually took on a Ball State intern into the art department at the Sun Sentinel. So I came back down to Miami. And as you'll notice, there's a theme here. I keep figuring out ways for people to get me back down to Miami. And so I came back down to Miami for about 6-8 months and worked in the art department at the Sun Sentinel. And then I landed a full-time job at the Virginian Pilot in the graphics department there. And I talked them into it simply by saying, not only can I do your print information graphics, I can also make these clickable and interactive for the web, which is going to add some richness to our web presence and our storytelling on the web. And so I got my foot in the door there. And then this was, again, it was a relatively small staff. It's what's considered a mid-sized newspaper. And when I started there, it was about 225 people in the newsroom. And when I left there 4 years later, there were 110. So in 4 years, and this was during like when the economy had taken a massive nosedive and newsrooms really had no idea what they were going to do because all of their financial revenue streams were just kind of gone. And so every time somebody left or somebody took a buyout, they never replaced those positions. So we went from a newsroom that was not huge, but 225 people is not small, to half that size in the 4 years that I was there. It didn't mean that we got less work. But it did mean that for young people that were willing to just look for opportunities to try things, I got an opportunity to get experience on the copy desk as a page designer, as well as in the art department. I was running multimedia before I left there in the photo department, which allowed me to do the presentation planning for interactive visual storytelling there. I got to do mini documentaries with the photographers there. It allowed me to really kind of get more involved with the business side because this was the very beginning of sponsored content, and they would need someone who was an artist to do a sketch for a potential advertiser so that they could sell it. And so I got more and more exposure to the business side and the sales team and learning more about what they did. I bring that up and I explain that as a little bit of context is because this is one of the things that really fueled me being successful at the Boston Globe. In 2010, I was hired as the editorial. This was a big enough newsroom that they had a editorial digital design director, a digital editorial design director, and not just a digital design director. They didn't. They had somebody who was over kind of the technology side of things, but then they wanted somebody who was a design director over the digital side of things, just around storytelling. And it just happened to work out that at the time the Boston Globe was owned by the New York Times, and the Times had given the Globe some funds to upgrade to a better content management system solution, as well as launch a new digital product for Boston Globe subscribers. So another thing to understand about this is the Boston Globe had a very, very profitable web product called Boston.com. And prior to this, Boston Globe content that went in the newspaper had a section in Boston.com. And there was very loyal Boston Globe readers that would go to Boston.com and find the Boston Globe content there on Boston.com. But Boston.com had a lot of other content. It was a huge, massive house, $50 million a year business, like a lot of community contributed content. It was a very successful convener of New England in a lot of ways. And so for the readers that were just looking for the digital version of Boston Globe newspaper content, it was kind of hard. So it was a pretty obvious throughway to be able to make an argument for a digital product. And so I won't go into the weeds around this, but if you guys have questions, which you might, I will definitely answer them. We came around to developing a web product for bostonglobe.com instead of doing an app. This is an important little thing to note because at the time, the only thing anybody was producing was apps and they weren't producing new web products in the industry. And so not only were we counter-programming against what everybody else was doing by doing a web product instead of an app product, we also took on a web design approach, which was very technical. It's pretty straightforward because it's just, it means that your web pages work on any screen size. It's kind of a very simple, crude way of explaining it. But when you're producing massive amounts of content like newsrooms and publications do, figuring out how the content flows on every single page is actually really complicated. And so while this design style had been around for a little while, we were the first site of any size or volume that produced a product using this technique. Which basically meant for me is I did a lot of speaking for the next 3 years after this. I went and spoke at a lot of web conferences, and I talked and helped people understand kind of the soft skills that happen when you're trying to get a large group of people to kind of come in around and agree on a design approach, a technology approach, a new content creation approach, and getting large groups of people to kind of all agree that this is the way we want to move forward involves soft skills that, by the way, women tend to excel at. The other thing that was going on at the Boston Globe, and I'm one of those people that Rebecca Monson, who she's very sweet, she likes to say that, yeah, you kind of wield a blunt tool more often than a more nuanced one. So I tend to be like, no, it needs to be this way, and everybody will just get smart enough and catch up with me. And over the years, I've gotten a little bit better at articulating why I would like to move forward on a strategy. But at the time, I was just kind of convinced that this was the right way to go. I had gotten my boss and the publisher to agree with me, and getting everybody else on board was just a little bit more like, well, the publisher agrees, so I don't care if you agree with me, which, by the way, was the wrong way to do this. So when we were redesigning Boston.com, which happened right after the BostonGlobe.com launch, internally and just between us and our friends in the webinar, it made it a little difficult. I had not made a lot of great friends in the first project, in the BostonGlobe.com project. So going into the Boston.com project, it got a lot more complicated for me to talk to people and help them to get on board with the new design ideas that we had for Boston.com. So what also happened right around the same time is the Times decided to put the Boston Globe up for sale. And I had worked at the Virginian Pilot when it was up for sale, and I was very aware of the fact that when a publication is up for sale, all decision making goes on pause. And when you're in kind of a mid-level management position, that means you can't do anything. You're kind of sitting in this state of not really doing much, but you have to do something. So it's really, you kind of feel like you're in this state of inertia. And I just wasn't really excited about that. And this opportunity at Northwestern came up right around the same time. And as a hiring manager at the Boston Globe, I was very frustrated by the next generation of young journalists that were coming out of J school and communication schools, that they didn't have the skills. While they were very smart, they were earnest, they had the energy, they actually didn't have the skills that I needed so that I could hire them. And while I felt I could like groom somebody who's a little bit green and take them on and sponsor them and mentor them, I wasn't the only person on the decision-making committee when it comes to hiring people. So I had to convince other people, and I had a hard time convincing my colleagues to hire somebody who was just a little bit green in the digital space and needed a little bit more coaching. And so what I decided to do is roll up my sleeves and go to a university and start working on this for a little bit. And I was working as the executive director, which sounds fancier than the work actually was, of a center that was co-owned by two schools at Northwestern, the computer science school and the journalism school. It was called Knight Lab, and as you guys know, have you all heard of the Knight Foundation here in Miami? Yeah, kind of funds basically everything that we do, especially in Miami. And so I love them. I shouldn't tease because I wouldn't be here without them. They've been a big sponsor of my career. And so they had funded this center at Northwestern that we named Knight Lab. And essentially what we were doing is we were convening computer science students, web-making students around at any college around the university with the journalism and communication students that were at Medill. And essentially what we did is we created a lab that was entirely student-run. And we developed a fellowship program that allowed the students the agreement that we had, the contract that we had was, I will pay you to write one article a quarter. So they're in the quarter system instead of semesters. And the articles have to be good. They have to be at professional quality, or else we won't publish them. They have to be something that you learned how to do in digital journalism or digital media. And it has to be in the tone of you turning around that you're now teaching your fellow student what you just learned. And this goes on the philosophy that if you just spent some time doing a tutorial on how to make a website hosted via Jekyll, that it will solidify in your memory if now you take some time to now teach your colleague. And also really reinforces a core philosophy that I believe in, which is horizontal loyalty. You should always be loyal to everybody at your level, especially women. And my feminist man that are sitting next to me, that I'm very happy that you're here. But we're not really great about being loyal to everybody across the aisle from us, because we see them as our competitors to getting promotions. When actually, when we support each other, the rising tide lifts all boats really kind of pans out, especially in early career points, okay? So what I really liked is that kind of moment that I was showing the students. This is how you can actually help each other, and you're going to help the school have a different way of practicing and thinking about the journalism that you're doing. They've gotten their core basics on how to do reporting. They're going and getting lots of practice writing, because I did not publish something until it had probably gone through 20 revisions between me and some of the editors on our staff. And so they really learned what it was like to actually write something that had real utility, real value. And then we were giving back to the digital journalism community, because we were producing tutorials for them. We were telling them how to do something. We were keeping them abreast of like latest technologies or latest approaches of things, and built a publication off of that. The other thing, a couple of them just really had a desire to learn how to make technology. And given the experience that I had and my colleague, we helped them build free tools that anybody can use, and they're web-based, and they are powered by Google Docs, which basically everybody has a Google account, right? So we have a timeline making tool, which is currently, to this day, and I've been gone now for almost 3 years, it is still the most popular open source free timeline producing tool in the world. Thank you, China. It supports 54 languages. And then my personal favorite tool is this little embeddable like sound player that you can be reading text. And let's say you're describing the sound of a guitar riff. You can listen to the guitar riff and hear the way that the writer is describing what you're listening to without having that experience being separate from each other. And it's a little tool called SoundSight. It's one of my personal favorite brilliant ideas that came from a guy who's now working at NPR on their visuals team. His name's Tyler Fisher. And let's see, there was a story map tool, which is like a mapping tool that allowed you to tell step-by-step things that happen over geography. The same tool powers something if you have, like, say, a big crowd picture and you want to point out step-by-step something that happened in a stadium, for example. It's just a tool that makes that, building that interface and gives you embeddable text that you can then use. And it works with most of the major CMSs. So we really felt we were adding value to the small newspapers, the mid-sized newspapers that don't have engineers on staff, that they could do more interesting, more nuanced storytelling in an interactive way. And so I stayed there for about 3 years. I was very proud of getting the center refunded, and then I moved on to go to National Geographic as one of their creative directors. National Geographic is massive, and this was the year before their buyout, where Fox bought out all of the media properties, and that was about the point that I left. Not for any bad reason or anything like that, but mostly because I wanted to take a moment to step back and figure out what I wanted to be doing with myself for real. And so a little bit after that, this opportunity came up, and that's how I ended up here. I love Miami. I believe deeply in beyond the classroom learning, so I'm not teaching any classes. But as your innovator in residence, I'm a resource to everybody in this room, as well as the media community in Miami at large. So I've been doing kind of little pop-up workshops on, like, how do I write, I've got this story, like, how do I get people to come and pay attention to the story? Or I've been reporting on this project for a while. I want to make sure people know about it. Like, how do I write an awareness strategy where I'm leveraging social media and getting people's attention and helping them know about something before they decide whether or not the story has value? And so that's a strategic way of thinking about reporting and telling stories. And then I've done a little pop-up workshop on, like, how do I do community engagement? Like, what does that really mean? Like, how do I actually become a part of a community if I want to tell the stories of that community? What does that really mean? And then the last thing I've been working on here is I'm in 2 weeks from now, which I'm really hoping that you guys are interested in coming to. In 2 weeks from now, we're convening a conversation about mobile media culture in the Americas with SCJ here and the LAC Center on MMC, which is the Latin American and Caribbean Center. And we're going to have a kind of a deep dive conversation about, whether or not, are you guys familiar with the concept of the digital divide? Raise your hand if you know what the digital divide is, kinda? Essentially, like, kind of crudely put, like, some people have access to digital and some people don't. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's really kind of staggering the different ways that people have access to being connected to the world via some areas are choosing to have a smartphone in lieu of paying for their, the lights to go on in their house. And in other areas, even if they had a smartphone, there would be no way to connect to anything. And in other areas, like, there's a wealth of connectivity. And so let's not talk about the region as like a big swath. Let's get a little bit better understanding. And like, what are some of the ways that independent media are telling the stories of their area? And so we've got a couple of really cool projects that are presenting, and we're going to close the day with a discussion about what are some of the emerging technologies and some of the current platforms that people are using, e.g. how are people using WhatsApp? How are people using Facebook Live? Like, what are really creative ways that you're telling stories and having conversations that have impact and that matter, and leveraging that in areas that maybe you don't have as many resources. And so that's what we're doing in 2 weeks from now. If anybody wants to come, I'd definitely love to have you come. And so at this point, I wanted to kind of take some questions and have a conversation. Yeah. March 23rd, 2 weeks from today. So I'm in a little bit of crunch time. I'm going home to go make social cards for all of the speakers, so that each speaker that's speaking has a cute little social card that has their perspective on mobile media culture in the Americas, and I'm excited. I gotta go do that tonight and design the program. So that's on March 23rd. It's down in the Graham Center in 2 weeks from now. It's a full day event. If you can only come for part of it, I would strongly encourage you coming for the second half, because we're also going to do a fun, what I'm calling a speed networking event from 5 to 7 in the Panther Suite. So if you can only make it for that part, that'll be the part where everybody's getting a chance to really talk with the different speakers. We've got the founder of Animo Politico is coming. We've got the founder of Catri Medio is coming. We've got couple people from Univision. We've got a couple of people from the Nootropic. We've got a couple of people from Fusion. And I can't remember everybody on the list right now. But it's definitely worth coming and meeting some of these people. They want to give you their time. We have a question from the webinar, and Christina asks, "What is the best open source for storytelling?" For storytelling tools. So I'm guessing this might be like a question about whether or not we're looking for open source meaning free and kind of accessible to anyone. There's just a bunch of different places. INN offers a bunch of different like embeddable storytelling tools, and INN Nerds is the team that powers that. So that's the International News Network, and they are kind of a platform for a lot of the nonprofit news, independent nonprofit news network, something like that. I'm definitely not representing them very well. But they've got a bunch of tools. Knight Lab still has their tools up, which if you go to projects.knightlab.com, you'll find a bunch of their tools if you want to use that. And then I Google when I'm looking for things, and there's always a different tool for everything that you want to be able to do. So my favorite way to find new things to do is just to ask Google. So, which I know is kind of a trite response, but before I take another question from the webinar, like, anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
You use Google News Lab. If so, can you explain to everybody the access that they offer?
I've not spent a lot of time using Google News Lab's tools. I know that they've got some tools available, especially around elections and voting. And so I've not spent a ton of time using some of those, but they're pretty accessible to find. I just wouldn't be the right person to talk about like how to make the most out of it. So it's been a while since I've been in a newsroom. Okay, question from the webinar. How can young women break into leadership roles in this digital age? It's a good question. First little bit of context that I would give is I don't believe everybody is intended to be a manager, and not everybody is intended to be in management positions, but you can still be a leader and not be a manager. Okay, so like first let's take a moment to step back and understand how you can be an introvert who is also shy and be a leader at the same time. There are different ways to express yourself. There are different ways to lead people and develop a perspective on things. So you don't necessarily have to be an extrovert. So for example, I'm very introverted, but I'm not shy in any kind of way. But after doing kind of a day-long conference, I basically want to crawl into a black hole for 2 days and not talk to anyone. Not because it was a bad experience, but because I just need to recharge, right? Meanwhile, my best friend, she's an extrovert. She goes to a full day-long conference and she's energized and she's excited and she gets a lot of fuel from being around people. And we both have very different leadership styles and stuff like that, and she really leverages her extroversion. I tend to leverage my introversion. You'll get, from me, you'll get things like, I'm thinking about the system. I'm thinking about, all right, here's a pain point that we're having in our process. Let me write some better documentation and then spend some time with you so that this new process of doing something is going to improve a workflow or make our end product a little bit better. So I have a different way of leading people in that kind of way. And so I think it's important to kind of understand that some people are really good at being speakers in front of a group of people and being that kind of leader, and some people are really good at doing kind of quiet leadership work. I've been more successful in my life by the quiet leadership work than I have been in ways where I tend to be in front of the camera. So my perspective tends to come from that point of view. Here's what the way that I found was the most helpful for helping me get new opportunities and have new challenges, so I got to learn and grow. And that's the way that I understand wanting to be in a leadership role, is because now I understand how to do everything that's going on here. Now I need a new challenge. And sometimes convening a group of people, developing consensus, and helping a group of people all do something in a common way so that strategically we hit a goal is what the leadership role means, what the management role means. And so I found that, like, in order to get in those kinds of positions, I not only needed somebody who was willing to mentor me, but I also needed somebody who's willing to sponsor me. And there's something different between the two. Raise your hand if you know the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. Kinda? Okay, so let's talk. Do you think there is a difference between mentorship and sponsorship?
Yeah. A mentor teaches you, a sponsor just endorses you.
That's a good way of putting it. He said a mentor teaches you and a sponsor just endorses you. And that's not bad. A sponsor also, in order to endorse you, has got to believe in you, because they're putting their reputation on the line at the same time. They're saying, if you trust my taste and my judgment, if I say this person is good, then you will go forward with working with that person, which is a little bit different than somebody who necessarily mentors you. A mentors you tends to be like, do this, not that. Go learn this thing. Go do this opportunity. Here are some things, but it doesn't necessarily help you get that job, help you get in there. A lot of times when you're asking somebody to recommend you for a job, when you apply for one, they're sponsoring you by being somebody who is going to be a reference for you on a job application. That's a very kind of crude way of putting it. I've been very fortunate that I've developed deep relationships with some people who acted as both a mentor for me and a sponsor for me. And over the years, I've gotten good at fostering those relationships. So when I'm trying to develop a mentorship relationship with someone, especially if there's somebody who's an extremely busy person, who's committed to a lot of things and evolved a lot of things, I tend to be very careful about like how I ask for their time. So let's just say, let me walk you through kind of a scenario. I might say, hey, do you mind if I buy you a coffee? You don't know me at all, but I think you're very cool. Can I buy you a coffee? Sometimes that you'll get an immediate yes. Sometimes somebody will respond with, what do you want to talk about? Do you have an ask? That's a pretty typical thing. Have an ask. Don't be afraid to have an ask. When you are asking for somebody's time, have something more concrete than I want to tell you my story and you just tell me what you think. Because it's very frustrating for somebody when they're first wanting to give you their time. They don't really know what to do, and it takes more time to get at something that they can deliver and help you in. So if you take a little time saying, you know what, I really would enjoy you to take 15 minutes to flip through my portfolio and tell me where I have holes in my portfolio in order to get X job. Now here's what that means for the person who's going to have coffee for it. They can now prepare. Let me go see what people in that, before they meet with you, they can go prepare and they can say, oh, people who want this job, they have to have these things in their portfolio if they don't immediately know it, right? They don't go to the coffee going like, you know what, I'm gonna have to do a little research and I'll get back to you. This is more efficient on both of your time. And it also shows, you are showing them respect, that you're respecting their time, that they've given you an hour, that you're gonna make the most out of that hour. So whenever you're asking for time from a mentor, be very, very mindful of what their time and what they're doing. If you're trying to develop a relationship with someone that you're hoping that will sponsor you and you don't have a personal relationship with them, my suggestion would be to be honest and just say, I'm hoping you'll sponsor me. And here, I would like to provide you with materials so that you feel comfortable enough helping me get into this job. I've never developed a relationship like that. I know people that have done that and have been very successful. I've never done that personally. The sponsors that I've had have been relationships that I've cultivated over years. They've been, either they were a teacher that I studied underneath, or they were a boss that I worked for a while, or they were somebody who was, who we worked together like 10 years ago, and now they're in a fancy job and they've known me for 10 years. And then I shoot them a note and say, I really want to go work here. I think what they're doing here is really cool. Can you help me talk to the right people? And so that's some of the ways that like I've gotten into leadership roles. And sometimes it's just kind of having to be in the right place at the right time. I have to tell you, when I was put into a leadership role at the Boston Globe, I was the only woman on the digital team. The only other woman was the chief operating officer for Boston Globe Publishing. So while she was on digital was just part of her portfolio. And one of the things that she did, which I always really loved, is once a month she convened a women's lunch. And all the women that were in like lower management to upper management roles had lunch with her, and she was like, this is a safe space. Chatham House rules, you can talk about anything, nothing's leaving here, but like, let's talk about stuff, because it was a very male environment, and generally at about 30 to 35 years old, all the women that were in J School and Communications, they leave. And it's not because they all get pregnant. I promise you that. And so, you know, she really wanted to keep her talent. She didn't want people to leave. And so she made a concerted effort to like create a space that we could talk. And I've always been very grateful to Lisa for not only doing that for us, but also showing me a way that she could, you know, just be there for us. She was very busy. So that was kind of a cool thing. But it was definitely, I fell into the job at the Globe on accident. I have to be in the right place at the right time. And they did not recruit for it. They just weren't going to hire somebody else. They had just hired me, so they moved me into that job. So, any other questions, thoughts? Do you guys want to talk about interviewing? Or like, how do I negotiate a raise? Or like, how do I ask for money and a salary? Or what do you want to talk about?
I like those questions.
You like all those questions? Yeah, every single one of those. The second one. So getting a raise or how to negotiate a salary initially? Both? Okay. So money sucks, right? Like money, talking about money, and literally nobody says this is how I talk about money. So years ago, I was at a conference, and one of the other speakers there had just been a White House digital fellow. He had just finished that. He had just finished publishing a book, and he had been like kind of an upper mid-level hiring manager at Blue State Digital. And he was explaining to me the difference between the conversations when he's hiring a man for a position versus when he's hiring a woman for the exact same position. He would say, we'd get to the salary point, and I'd say, okay, what are your salary expectation? And the women would almost always say, whatever you're planning to spend, or would ask for anywhere between $40,000 and $80,000 less than it was even budgeted for. And he goes, and the men would always ask for $40,000 to $80,000 more than had been budgeted for. And that, he's like, I know it's a sweeping generalization. There are some like nuances in between, but if I were to just say this is what the women did versus what the men did, the men always said, you know what, I'm just going to ask for the moon. And then they'll be like, dude, it's not even budgeted for anything above 120. I can pay you that. And the women would be like, I'll take $80,000. And you'd be like, all right, I'll take you for $80,000. Because as a hiring manager and understanding their perspective, their job is to get the best talent that they can for as cheap as they can. I mean, in general, that is their perspective. Their perspective is not, how can I pay you the most? Which is a stupid mistake I made for a really long time. I'm like, I'm really good. Why wouldn't you want to pay me a lot of money? And they're like, because you're willing to do this for $43,000 a year. Why would we pay you $83,000 a year? And I was like, I never thought about it that way. So money's uncomfortable. So here's my pro tips, generalized pro tips for talking about money when they've offered you the job. So first thing I try to avoid doing always when I am applying for a job, especially if you're only talking to HR and you're not talking to the hiring manager, they will ask you a question that's something to the tune of, what are your salary expectations? And the first person who puts out a number is the first person who loses. So that's the game in a negotiation. You want to be the last one to put out a number. So I try to do a little dance and say things like, I expect to be paid a salary that's commensurate with the work that is required of me. So I didn't say a number. Also, what does that sentence mean? Sometimes the HR person will take that as an answer. Sometimes they'll be like, well, I mean, are your expectations, can you give me a range around your expectations? Then I would say, you know, I'd really rather not. I'd rather not. I'd like to go a little bit deeper because I'm not even sure that I want this job yet. And an interview is about me deciding whether or not I want to work there and you guys deciding whether or not you want to work with me. And they always like that response because that's what an interview is. An interview is a conversation. So you should apply for every job, go through, if they want to interview you, you're getting practice interviewing, and then decide later whether or not you want the job. Don't not apply for something because you're not sure if you want it and you're also not sure if you'll be available at that time. Apply anyways, okay? When you get to the point where you're actually having a real conversation about salary. In general, that's nuanced, right? Like, think about compensation as a package, all right? Let's say you've worked somewhere for 4 to 5 years and you've earned 3 weeks of salary working 3 weeks of vacation working somewhere else. And you get offered another job, they're willing to pay you 10 or 20% more than what you had been paying. You were paid really, really underpaid at your old job. So you're like, 20% is not enough, but I really want to work there. Part of your compensation is your vacation. So if they say to you, all right, we'll start you at $80,000 a year, which is 20% more than you were making before, so good, you're going up a little bit, and everybody gets 1 week of vacation, you can say at the point, and after you've been hired, you cannot say this. You can say, I have 3 weeks vacation at my other place, can I carry that over? This is the only time, and they can say no, but you will definitely not get it if you don't ask, okay? When you are given a salary offer, ask about professional development investments, okay? Because while that might not be additional money in your bank account, especially in communications field, you will need to be trained constantly. And so if they have not started thinking about ways that you're going to be able to go to conferences and have budget to be able to go to these opportunities to learn more and go learn of the latest techniques, the latest ways that people are doing things, then that's also that tells you a little bit about how they value you anyways. And more hiring managers are working in professional development opportunities and budgets for that into their compensation packages. For example, one of the things, and don't hold me to this number because this might have changed, but one of the things that Vox Media does, they don't pay the highest salary. But everybody on staff has $1,000 in professional development money that they can use in any way they want. They can use it for going to a conference, they want to go to a hackathon, they want to use it to go, because their teams are distributed around the country, they want to go work for a week with one of their other team members that's in San Francisco, they can use it for that. They just get a budget that they can make a decision on how they want to use their professional. They want to take an online course that costs $900, they can use it that way, right? which is a nice little thing. So this is part of, in the salary conversation, asking about, are they going to make an investment on developing you as your technical skills and opportunities for you is a good point. This is also a good point to ask this question. And then the last thing that I would say about money is be really careful about when you take a salary getting too dug into a place in communications fields, okay? If you're working in media, you're working in PR, you will always take significant jumps in salary if you're willing to move. But if you stay in one place or you make an investment in one company, they're really probably only going to give you 5 to 7% if you're really, really an outstanding employee raise every year. You're not going to get a 30% jump in salary. And if you, let's say you get a new job within the company, you go from a not management job to a management job, you're not going to get a huge jump in salary in the way that if you went to a similar management job at another company, that you might get a huge jump in salary. That's the reality of things now. This is one of the reasons why people say that your generation, and by the way, I'm 15 years older than you, and my generation is probably going to have 7 to 10 careers before we retire, or jobs before we retire. I'm at 7 jobs and I'm 37. How old am I? 37. I'm at 7 or 8 jobs at this point and 3 careers. So, and I'm that old. Ooh, question from the webinar. Lourdes asks, what should my digital portfolio contain? Ooh, that's actually, I need more context. What kind of, Lourdes, what kind of work are you doing? Are you doing, web design work? Are you doing interactive storytelling? Are you doing web documentaries? Because all of these questions will have something different. The only generalized answer that I can give for everybody is you should all have a web presence. You should not be afraid to make a website, because, Squarespace could not possibly make this easier. You should all be on LinkedIn. You should have a smart approach to LinkedIn. I know it's awful and it's ugly, but you know what? The business world uses it, so that's where you should be. You should be using all of the tools and have presences in those places, even if that's not you should have a professional presence in some kind of way on all of the platforms. And play with tools, never be afraid to play with a tool. But as far as a digital portfolio goes, like are you a writer? Like, what are you, are you a consultant? Like, just need a little bit more context around that. Any other questions while we wait for Lourdes? Yeah.
Do you feel like this area of profession is a lot about like who you know, as opposed to what you know?
So the question was, do I feel like this area or profession, and you mean communications fields in general, is all about who you know? All right, here's what I'll say to that. Yes, but I don't know a field that isn't. So yes and no. America likes to think of itself being run on a meritocracy, but by and large, our meritocracy works in a way that we hire people that think like us and look like us. This is unfair, but it's true. My parents work in entertainment. They work for Disney, okay? They worked, when I was a kid, we were poor artist kids, they worked for theaters. I moved around like an army brat. They always got jobs based on who they knew. They got hired, my dad would get hired as a director based on who knew him. My mom would get, my mom works in the costuming shop, she would get, one of the costume shop gigs based on who knew her. And so that's why I know it's kind of, like always going on a first date, but going to networking events and building relationships in those, that's the reason why that exists. So Lourdes is a news journalist about to graduate. What should her digital resume look like? Okay, so if you're writing, you need to be writing all the time. If you're shooting photographs, you need to be shooting all the time. If you're making videos, you need to be making tons and tons of videos. If you're making websites, you need to look at every single website you possibly can. So if you're a news journalist, then I would be looking for every single opportunity you have to write stories. And just, even if sometimes a story is bad or just not coming to fruition, the practice of writing, making that a habit, is a very big deal. I'm a deep believer in Malcolm Gladwell's theory about 10,000 hours when it comes to the craft of communication skills. You get good at it, the more you do it. There's a whole series of Ira Glass videos where he's just saying, oh God, if you looked at some of the stuff that I did in my early 20s, you would be like, how did you get this job now? And my response was, because I made myself my own job. So sometimes that's really what it is. But the point that he's making is he really put in the hours. You're not going to learn how to write JavaScript by putting a book about JavaScript under your pillow and sleeping. Like, it doesn't get in your brain that way. You just have to write a lot of JavaScript. You want to get good at telling stories about Little Haiti. You got to write a lot of stories about Little Haiti, right? You want to get good about writing stories about the food community in Wynwood. You got to write a lot of stories about the food community in Wynwood and look for every opportunity you can, because the more practice you can get, the better. So your digital resume should reflect the fact that you have taken every opportunity you can to get that. I'm not somebody that believes that you have to have every single digital skill. That said, I do think that modern hiring managers are looking that you not only are writing a lot, but also thinking about, how am I going to develop an audience for my content? It should not be somebody else's job necessarily to find an audience for your content. That if you end up at a place that has somebody in a role that's helping your stories and your beat and your content find an audience, that's great. That's an extra tool. But at the end of the day, it's your reputation. You're the one who wrote it. You're the one, especially if you're reporting, it's your story, it's your baby. You should be a member of the community. They should know you in some kind of way. So developing an audience around your stories and around your area of expertise is just basically the way we do things now. So I've got about 10 minutes left. How about one more question or two more questions? Yeah.
You said that you got experience a lot by finding the areas where you could expand your skill set and learn something new. So how do you go about that? Do you just find a textbook and start learning it, or how do you get that skill?
Yeah, how do you learn how to learn? Oof, man, that's a really meta question, and I feel like we should all, like, what was that movie about going in the brain, then going in the brain? Inception. This is an Inception question, right? So there's a skill to Googling, all right? And so I think that's one of those things that, like, when you're trying to learn how to do something, how to Google and get an answer to your question is the first question you should be asking yourself. Instead of saying, how do I do this thing? It should be, how do I Google to figure out how to do this thing? And then the first place that I would go is I'd think, all right, who is doing the thing that I want to do? Go, and I like cyber stalk them, right? Like I'm reading their whole Twitter, I'm looking at every video that they've ever produced, if they've ever been asked to write a tutorial on something, and I look for the resources that they cite. Then I go to those resources and dig in a little bit. And then also, you'd be surprised how often this works. I tweet directly at rando people and I'm like, dude, I think you're cool. Can I buy you a coffee? And you'd be surprised how often that works. Like, I really want to do what you do. And it works, like, if they're like, I don't have time for a coffee, but I can talk on the phone for half an hour if you want to do that, and I can give you some tips, like, go here. Like, if you wanted to learn more about, like, how people are crafting, I've got my friend who's back there, or maybe he left, that was working on drone journalism, capturing content via drones. There's a whole drone journalism lab at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Like, you could Google and kind of find that, but if you were like drone stories, unless you did drone journalism, that lab is not gonna come up. It's not that popular, it's such a niche thing. So I usually start with who's doing what I wanna do. I ask them, but not until I've done my own research first, because if I can answer my question without asking them, that's just gonna make them not like me very much. So that's usually what I wanna do. Is there something specific in mind that you had in mind, or just wanted general tips?
General. Kind of like find the gaps in where you're already working so you can keep growing while you have the same position.
Yeah, so I like, in general, like, I had a professor when I was an undergrad say to me something once that just changed my entire perspective on getting something done. And he said, and then he gave me context, but he said bluntly, never take no for an answer. And he said, but there's a nuance to that, right? Sometimes when you ask for something, right, I want to be able to go do this story. I want to be able to learn how to move into this position, and you get a no, there might be a reason behind it. So usually the very first question is, just for my own education and for my own growth, professional development, can you tell me why? The answer is no. And sometimes that creates an opportunity where you'll see my little chess strategic mind that allows you to go back for 2 days and rethink how you're going to craft your proposal that takes their reason why they said no in mind, has a good response to that, and then I represent the idea, sometimes as if it's a brand new idea, and sometimes it says, hey, so I've been thinking about the feedback that you gave me, and I thought, what if it was more like this? Would that be something that we could do? And a lot of times you'll get the answer yes, and you'll create the opportunities that give you the experience that you need in order to be eligible for the leadership position. So that's kind of the steps that get you there. Is that a good answer? Okay, cool. Never take no. Yeah?
So what about with a job? And you don't get the job, is it okay to email them or something, contact and say why they think you should?
So her question was, I didn't get the job, and they just said we decided to go with somebody else. I'm paraphrasing here, and I don't know why I didn't get the job. Is it okay if I ask? So I can't answer for everyone, but in the positions that I've been in 4 positions where I've been a hiring manager. Only one time in filling 12 different positions over 7 years, only one time did anybody ask me that, and I cleared 3 hours to talk to him. Because nobody ever asks. He was very respectful in the way that he asked. He said, I got to be honest with you, I was really excited, and do you mind just giving me some feedback on why? And I said, absolutely. I've got time on Friday afternoon, and we sat on the phone for 3 hours and we talked about it. Here's where you can go if you want to learn how to grow this particular skill. Here, I felt you could have probably worked on how you presented yourself in this particular interview in this very actionable way. That was the feedback that I gave him. Mostly because I was really impressed that he wanted to learn how to do it better. And I just think that actually more often than not, people don't ask why. So that's why I think you should. I think you should always ask why. Whenever you're going to know, you should always ask why. Do it with respect, but ask why. And if somebody just really doesn't like you, they'll be mean. But for the most part, people will just be like, there's no mustache twirlers out there. They're just busy people. They didn't realize that, they stepped on your toe, right? So, if you say, hey, can you give me a little feedback? In general, everybody wants to do good. Everybody wants you to improve. You just have to ask. Any other questions? I think we might have time for one more. Oh, yeah.
Earlier you mentioned that we would encourage us to apply to anything and everything. But I want to know if it's a bad idea to apply to multiple positions within one company.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a very good clarification. Okay, so what she just asked was, for my webinar people, is when you want to get into a company, is it a bad idea to apply to multiple positions within one company? And in general, I would not do that. If you're applying to Google, the possibility of those hiring managers talking to each other may or may not. But in general, I don't think that's a great idea, because what that basically says is what you're saying to the company is, I don't care what job I have, I just want to work here. I'll clean the toilets, right? That's essentially what you're saying. And it's really, you can present a beautiful steak on a gorgeous white plate, to quote a Bill Cosby episode, or you can present a beautiful steak on the top of a garbage can lid. You want to present yourself in the best way possible, right? Not on top of the garbage can lid. And so if you just really do want to work somewhere, just be honest about that. Say it in your application to one place. Look, I'm applying for this position, but I would like to also be considered for these other things as well. And so if I'm not right for this one, can we have a conversation about these other ones that you have listed as well? And that way you're not wasting their time by having to go through your same application in multiple places in their application system, but you're very clearly saying that in one. And when you apply, sometimes through a little bit of sleuthing, you can figure out who the hiring manager is. A pro tip, when you apply into a big company and they've got a whole system behind it, send an email with your materials also to the hiring manager saying, hey, I just put this into the system. I hear that you might be the hiring manager. I'm not sure. I really, really want to talk to you about this opportunity. So I thought I would just email you directly to make sure it doesn't get lost. Lots of respect there, but is also a way of making sure that the right person sees something. Any other questions? Yeah.
What about contacting them like through LinkedIn, like the hiring?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. If you can't find their email address. So he asked about, can I contact through LinkedIn? So a couple weeks ago, there was a gentleman who was speaking on the main campus from Google about one of the Google CMS products. And I don't have his contact information. He's done a very good job of bearing it, but I found him on LinkedIn and I was like, dude, you may not respond to this, but if you're willing to, I got a question for you. And he responded. I was just really clear about it, respectful, and as long as you're communicating whatever message way you use to communicate with people, if you do it with respect, then in general people will not be bothered by it. I mean, if you sent them a mail at their home, that wouldn't be cool. That would definitely, okay, I take that back. That would definitely not be cool. Don't do that. But if you know that they're going to be at an event that's here in Miami, sometimes showing up for the networking part, going and introduce yourself in person, saying, hey, if I could have 5 minutes of your time, I just want to ask you a few questions, and I'm a student, or I'm a young professional, and I thought maybe you might be able to give me a little guidance. Sometimes in person, they'll give you a quicker response as well. Yeah, follow up? Go for it.
Because if you wanted to get a job, let's say in London or something, you find the HR manager of that company in London and messaging them.
I have never had a lot of luck contacting the HR departments to get into a job. Unfortunately, that is kind of their role, and I've heard success stories where that's worked, just not a lot of them. So, their role usually is to do the initial screening, so the actual hiring manager doesn't have to go through everybody who's very clearly not qualified. They don't have, if the manager's been very clear about somebody, I want them to have been writing about environmental science for 10 to 15 years. Anybody with less experience than that, we're not even going to consider. HR is really useful for that, right? So somebody who's only has 5 years of experience but is writing just as well and reporting just as well, you'll have to find another way to get their attention than going through HR. That make sense? Yeah, real quick.
That actually kind of goes into the question I wanted to ask. I'm looking for jobs, and I see people say let's say I'm going to an assignment desk position, and it's you need 4 years of experience working at an assignment desk, as an example. But I still feel like I have the skills. I still feel like I have the skills that I could, be of use to them in that position or something like that. Would it be a waste of time to apply, or or would it, you don't have that those many years of experience?
So I personally, if the experience requires anything less than 5 years, I think you should go after it right now. At the very least, the experience that you're getting out of going after it is getting good at getting rejected. Because in this industry, you just got to be good at it, right? One of the things I was telling Lillian earlier is I went back and rewatched her keynote speaker from last year's Women's Leadership Conference was a woman that I used to work for at National Geographic, Susan Goldberg. And one of the things she opened up her talk about was saying, I was rejected 72 times before I got my first job. And she's now the very first woman editor at National Geographic, which has been publishing magazine for 140 years. Okay, so you get a thick skin and you get better at asking, why did I get rejected? The more you get rejected, then use it as a learning opportunity. Not that I think that you'll get rejected. I also think that you want to prepare yourself for making a case why you should be considered even though you don't have 5 years of experience, which is also a really good exercise. I think we're at time.
Thank you, Marissa. And let me also follow up and just note a follow-up on the conference that she just mentioned. On April the 20th, all day long in the Wolf University Center, we're going to have our second annual conference, a Women in Communication, Breaking the Barriers. It'll be all day long, so you can come in whenever you can. We have some great speakers lined up, and last year, as she mentioned, Susan Goldberg was our keynoter. And this year we have as one of our keynoters. We have two keynoters. Ann Vasquez, who is the Chief Digital Officer for Trunk Incorporated. Now, you may not know what that is, but it's the old Tribune publishing company, which publishes the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale and the Orlando Sentinel and the Chicago papers and LA papers. So she's a really big deal. She's a very high-ranking woman in the digital world. She's keynoting our conference. It's starting at 9:30 in the morning in the ballroom of the Wolf Center. So put it on your calendars. It is free. It is open. We'll have some snacks for you. So please, do join us. And let's all thank Marissa and give her a good, nice round of applause.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I actually have a stack of, so if you guys want, if anybody wants to have a coffee.
I'm sorry, I didn't call her Miranda. I don't know why I did that. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I got a correction.
People call me Amanda. I get Amanda a lot. But if anybody wants to have coffee with me or whatever, I've got some cards here. Shoot me an email. Nope, sorry. Here. I got